Welcome back to our channel. I want to thank you for watching. In this episode, we are looking at the reason why the rich and powerful nations are playing the developed and emerging economies with regards to climate change. The rich countries have actually developed their economy and also grow their economic potential at the peril of the climate. The time has come for them to put their hands deep into their pocket to make the available requirement in terms of the contribution that they mentioned a couple of years ago, looking at since 2009. Rich nations failed to meet a long-standing pledge to deliver over $100 billion to help poorer countries cope with the climate change. If you look back in 2009, I'm going to give you an example regards to the country of Malawi in the continent of Africa.
Either we pay up or we perish. And
that by 2020, they will transfer over $100 billion per year to vulnerable states that are severely having impact of climate disaster in their different countries. In fact, they did provided over $83 billion as of 2020, failing by $16 billion, short of just the target. The Organization for Economic Cooperations and Development based on their own data. But if you look at this particular episode and the reason why this climate issue is not going anywhere soon, finance has become a score point to these particular talks, and developing economies say that they cannot afford to curb the pollutions without the support from rich nations responsible for most of the CO2 emissions hitting the planet today. Africa needs to approach climate in a very cautious way. Those countries that are advanced, who are developed, who actually warm the climate or warm the world should be responsible. They need to pay a huge sum of the contribution. We are talking about the $100 billion that was promised since 2009, and most of those countries are not meeting up to their commitment. It is important that Africa consider its growth, development of its citizens, who most African countries heavily depend on fossil fuel. This is going to be this way if the rich countries are failing behind to meet this particular commitment. Let me give you an example with regards to the country of Malawi in the continent of Africa. If you look at data, Malawi in particular is prone to adverse climate hazards that includes dry spells, seasonal drought, intense rainfall, and also riverine floods. If you also look at the flash floods happening in Malawi, droughts and floods, the most severe of those hazards have increased in frequency. The intensity is high and the magnitude over the past 20 years, with dire consequences on food and water security, water quality, and also energy resources and sustainable livelihood of the most vulnerable communities. If you look at data from 1979 to 2008, over 2,500 people perished due to natural disasters alone in Malawi, and nearly another over 21.7 million people were adversely affected. Flood and drought are the leading cause of chronic food security, which is endemic in many parts of this particular country. The recent climate event, the president of Malawi had an interview with the BBC, and he actually spelled his country's position with regards to this particular issue and why this is not going to go anywhere soon. In his own words, the rich countries should pay or they're gonna be perishing. Let's listen to what he has to say, and we will join you again on the other side.
It is time to do something. Another president who is here is Lazarus Chakwera of Malawi. I sat down with him and I began by asking him just how climate change is affecting his country.
I think what has happened, if you take, for example, the agreement or pledge made in Copenhagen 12 years ago by the rich nations, they pretty much didn't come through with it. And they seem to be growing cold feet. And so when we speak up, for example, when we say, fulfill your pledge, it's not a matter of charity. It is a matter of paying up a cleanup fee. Say if you have been involved in bringing the earth we call home to this stage, let's clean it up, but you have to be responsible.
How much are African countries talking in one voice? Because it seems as if when they do talk in one voice, the things that they say are very vague, and then it seems every other person is doing their own individual thing. And how will that work? Wouldn't speaking with one voice work better?
Right now, I think we are more speaking with one voice than ever before.
What are you saying?
In SADC and the least developed nations and the Group 77, what we are saying is this. Developed nations, you pay up. Let your word be equal to your action, because you cannot be talking about less emissions when you are producing more.
What's going to be Africa's bottom line at this conference? Like you said, promises have been made. Copenhagen, Kyoto, Paris just recently. None of those promises has been kept. COP26 is the next roadblock,
Right.
or checkpoint, if you like. What is Africa's bottom line at this conference?
This is a fork in the road now. And so we're saying, pay up, do what you preach. This is about trust, it's about survival of the human race. Let us talk to each other. Let our scientists in the South and the global North talk to each other. Let us determine what future we want. Otherwise, we are all sinking together. And if they think it's our problem because we are, in quotes, poor nations, because we're really not poor as much as the people are poor. These are the nations that have supplied the raw materials for the developed nations to be where they are today. And so we are saying, let's talk as adults. Talk around the table, bring everybody needed, even those of us considered not belonging to that table, because they will not succeed without us. We cannot succeed without them. It must be as one person.
I'm going to rephrase that question, just tweak it slightly. You're going to tell the developed nations, pay up or what?
Pay up or perish.
The climate issue is a major issue with regards to emerging economies, especially in the continent of Africa. South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor actually hit home with regards to this particular issue, as most developed countries who have grown their economy and also they have the potential and the possibility to finance this particular disaster that they have put in the world with regards to the development and advancement with regards to their own growth in different areas. This issue is so important that African countries should approach climate in terms of their own growth or transition in a careful way. That's the reason why the responsibility that the globe has. You do have other nations that have to pay more, and some will need to pay a little bit less or in terms of their action. But financially, you don't expect African countries to make those huge contributions that those countries that were responsible for heating the planet are going to be paying. Let's listen to what the South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor had these discussions in the International Relations Commission.
One of the concerns that an African minister might have is that many of our conferences are excellent talk shops where we pass very good resolutions, where countries make significant commitments, but the commitments are not followed by practical action. So if you look at the outcomes of a series of climate change conferences, you would find that funding was promised. You would find that technology capacity was referred to, but if you investigate what followed, none of those actually came into fruition. So we continue to say, as Africa, we accept that we have a responsibility to respond. So we have a common responsibility as part of the world community, as part of humanity. All of us must take steps to protect the environment. But our responsibilities are different. So we have common but differentiated responsibilities, because developing countries didn't make the larger contribution to the problem that we're confronted with today. But we're accepting that we must respond as well. We can't say, you fight climate change and we'll continue emitting. So common but differentiated. The differentiation means those with means must provide funding support, which has been promised over many, many decades but has not come forth. So South Africa, we've gone out somewhat on a limb. We are the chair of the Environment Committee of African Ministers of the Environment, and we've been working to develop a common African position that will come to Glasgow later this year.
Hopefully, African countries can approach this particular climate change issue in a careful way. Most countries in the continent of Africa still rely heavily on fossil fuel, and a smooth transition could benefit the continent. However, African countries should demand for money from rich countries who have actually warmed the planet today, and they have to meet up with the $100 billion that they promised from 2009. That is so essential for countries like Zimbabwe, Malawi, and other countries that farmers heavily depend on those particular aspects with regards to their own growth in terms of farming, economic development, and prosperity. They will need to approach this in a careful way. Even advanced countries like in terms of the continent of Africa, like South Africa, Morocco, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, and you do have Kenya and the rest of the other developing and emerging countries in the African continent. They have to approach climate issues in a careful way. Africa should not just dive into this particular climate thing. They need to demand the money to come from rich countries who have to pay. They must pay for this to make sure that they have to meet those different quotas. Of course, every region around the world in Asia, every country or every particular polluters like China, the United States, those countries are also going to commit themselves, of course. But again, Africa should approach climate transition in a careful way. In the words of the Zimbabwean president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, who actually said that he would not actually transition so smoothly if the money is not available. If the money is there, Zimbabwe will consider a smooth transition like any other country in the continent of Africa. We want to thank you for watching The Explorer. If you are new to this channel, we encourage you to subscribe. Check our informative videos on this YouTube channel. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
There is still a long list of complicated issues that need sorting out. More ambition to reduce harmful emissions, a global agreement on carbon markets, more protection for forests, more cash for developing nations. All of these things need agreement if this summit is to be deemed a success. The UK will promise more funding for climate vulnerable countries. It still won't be enough.
We are at a crossroads, fork in the road. Either we pay up or we perish. And if we are thinking for some reason one segment will perish, another will be saved, we are deluding ourselves because we are facing this existential problem together.